There's a good chance you know who Respawn Entertainment are by now. If you didn't know them for Apex Legends or Jedi Fallen Order, you probably knew them back when they were a team of ex-Modern Warfare 2 employees that went on to give us the Titanfall games. Now I love Apex as a fun little game to play every now and then, and don't get me wrong, it's exciting to see Respawn expand to work on so many games, like Medal of Honor VR, which I honestly can't wait to play and see how it compares to Half-Life Alyx. But as a huge fan of Titanfall 2, it was kind of disappointing that around the time of Apex Legends launch, there were no plans for a third installment, and even now, Titanfall 3 doesn't seem to be in active development. That basically pushed me into trying out Titanfall 1 last year through EA's Access program as a way to kill time, and honestly I'm quite glad I did. Looking back on Respawn's first game, it holds up wonderfully. Let's start off with the visuals, which look quite nice for a 6-year-old game. Running on a modified version of the source tech that ran games like Half-Life 2 and Left 4 Dead, it's impressive how much they pushed the engine on a technical level. Of course on Xbox One some sacrifices had to be made. The resolution is only just above 720p and the frame rate isn't exactly the most stable, with a few drops here and there. There's a few rough textures here and there, but overall it looks quite nice for a game made by about 65 people. Of course the gameplay is what the Titanfall series is known for, and the small team at Respawn got a ton of things right their first time for a new IP. Instead of wasting their time on a single player campaign when people started to view them as afterthoughts, the team at Respawn made the most of their limited resources, and instead focused on making this really great multiplayer only game. People that wrote it off as Call of Duty both robots and jetpacks weren't entirely wrong, but there's a lot more to Titanfall than that. Most games had some form of advanced movement system this gen, but Titanfall felt different since the entire game felt designed around it in mind, unlike some of the more sci-fi Call of Duties where it just felt tacked on at the last minute. You could also aim from the hip and still be accurate with most guns, and they all feel satisfying to use. There's tons of surfaces where you could build up speed by wall running, with the map seemingly designed with verticality and huge map sizes in mind to complement the wall running in Titans. It's to the point where even the act of moving around the maps can be a fun game in itself. Speaking of Titans, they feel pretty different in this game unlike with Titanfall 2's predefined classes. You can customize them however you want the same way Create a Class works. You can mess around with their perks to take more damage or move faster. You could give them whatever weapons you want. It's one thing I honestly kind of wish was kept for Titanfall 2, the amount of freedom you had when customizing your Titans, even though the system in that game still works good. There's also things like burn cards exclusive to just Titanfall 1, which could offer you things like more powerful versions of your weapons, ways to earn more XP by going after certain targets, or constant abilities each life, like cloaking or something. The trade-off though is that you can only use them once per life, and you only get to bring 3 cards per match. This can also create a bit of decision making for which cards you'll want to bring, even though there's some cards you'll probably end up selling. Going back to the maps, there's something I like about them a lot more here than in the sequel. Each map here just feels unique, from fighting in swamps, to forests, to beach resorts, to AI war simulations. Not a single one of them feels out of place in this game, and they all feel so much fun to replay. There's a reason why some of them were ported over to Titanfall 2, because they really are just that much fun to play. There's some minor gripes I have with this game though, like the story, which I can't really talk about since I didn't pay much attention to it. Each match in the campaign playlist basically plays out like your standard round of domination or attrition, but with some cutscenes before and after each match. In the heat of battle though, it's far too easy to completely tune out what radio chatter exists though. The story isn't anything you'd miss out on, and it's really the only problem I have with an otherwise great game. Of course, despite how much I love the time I spent with Titanfall 1, recommending this game nowadays isn't that easy. Most of the playlists in this game are kind of dead, but there's still a dedicated player base on Xbox One that averages to just around 300 players. You could still get copies of this game for cheap on EA's Access program or finding physical copies, though Titanfall 2 personally feels like a more well-rounded experience with a larger player count on PC than the first game on Xbox. It's also an online-only game, so there's no telling when the servers will go down, which is probably a tough sell for people hooked on Apex and for people that are only casual fans of the sequel. But for people that own an Xbox One and can just use EA Access to get the game, that's a different story. Assuming you could put up with a low player count and you still loved Apex and Titanfall 2 enough to where you want more, it's still worth going out of your way to get the first game. Titanfall 1 is still a quality game even 6 years later, and it's a quality game that helped pave the road for Respawn to make them the juggernaut they are now.